again. The title of this video is The Countries in Ezekiel's Battle. And we're going to be looking at Ezekiel 38-39. That's where the Ezekiel's battle happens. And we're going to be looking at the way different countries are participating in that battle. And there are three groups of countries that you can break them all down into. And Ezekiel lists two of those. And they're listed based on their tribes. And so these aren't the tribes of Israel. These are other tribes that were known to Israel, came off of Abraham and others like that. And so Ezekiel lists them by their tribal name. And what we need to do is we need to find out where those are in terms of modern countries. But anyway, in the list, these tribes that he lists, there's a set of them, a large number of them that are in the attack group, the group that actually goes into Israel and attacks Israel and is destroyed. Okay, and those are clearly listed. And then there's another group, a smaller group, and these are the ones who make a very curious comment about the others who are in the attack group. And so we're going to really look at those because they're an interesting group. They're telling us something, and we need to figure that out. And so, as I said before, these tribes that are listed, we need to find their tribal lands. They all started in different countries and moved to other places, but history does record, at least for most of them, where they moved to, and we have a pretty good idea of where they are or were at the time Ezekiel wrote this. So we can find out what the country names are in terms of countries we know right now, but the borders aren't going to be exactly the same. Those groups didn't have much for borders in those times. They were more city-states than countries. And so when you see a group named, a tribe named, they may not have been occupants of the entire country that they were now in. They may have just been populating part of it. And we'll certainly see that in the case of Turkey, where three different tribal groups are named, and they were all located in different places in Turkey. Okay, so those two groups Ezekiel lists, that's the attack group and the curious comment group. And then there are another set of countries that you can draw up yourself by looking at a map and saying, well, these are other countries that you would expect to be in this group. Why are they not in this group? And so why aren't they listed? They're just not participating in some reason for some who knows what. And so all of these three groups we're going to look at here and understand them. We'll be looking at maps to figure out more about where they are and get a sense of what's going on. So first of all, the attack group, a large group. They're described as Magog. Remember, this attack is done by a person who's referred to symbolically as Gog, and he is the prince of Magog. What is Magog? The best understanding is that these are what are called the Stan republics. I think they were part of the USSR at one point. I think they're now separate, most of them, maybe not all of them. But anyway, they are the Stans because their names all ends with Stan. So there's Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and the one that doesn't fit the pattern, which is Kyrgyzia. And who knows, maybe Afghanistan is in that list too. People aren't just sure about where all of these tribes, the Magog tribes, went to. But those Stan republics are definitely where Magog went to. Now, Rosh is almost certainly a reference to Russia, and it may include more southern Russia or possibly some of the Soviet nations that were connected to it. And so that again gets to be looking at the Stan republics. And so southern Russia and the Stan republics are again part of that group. Meshech and Tubal, those are part of modern day Turkey. Persia, we know as Iran now. Kush is now called Sudan. Put is called Libya now. And Ezekiel also refers to Gomer, and they are another part of modern day Turkey, a different part than the other part. And Beth Togarmah is again another part of what's modern day Turkey, but a different part from the other two who are in Turkey. So there are three different tribal groups, well, I guess four if you count Meshech and Tubal separately, that are now in the area that we now call Turkey. And the rest are from other places. So that's the attack group. And on a map, this is what this looks like. Let me get my laser pointer out. Okay, so the Stan republics are all over here and in here. This is the Soviet Union. So this is an old map. With Russia now, it's much smaller, and a lot of things have separated. So the Stan countries or republics are up in this area here, and they go way off the map over here, way out in this area, and so that's where they are located. Turkey, we should know, is called Asia Minor in the Bible, and so that's where that is. And the next one is Iran or Persia, and that's this one. So we can see that we have a connection through all of these three, connecting these areas all together in the north. And so that was Iran included in there. Sudan is down here, okay, south of Egypt, and Libya is west of Egypt, okay? So we're going to look at these groups. Now you can see there's an obvious breakdown in these groups. There's these two here, which are over on this side, and this whole bunch up here that are all in the northeastern side. And that's going to make sense. The Bible even refers us or hints us at what that is. So we know that they get slaughtered. God says that he's going to open up earthquakes that destroy them and throw stuff in the air and burn them up with fire and brimstone. We know that's the outcome. And so where exactly does it say that they're going to be slaughtered? Well, that Ezekiel 39 specifies that pretty clearly. It says, speaking to Gog, you will fall on the mountains of Israel, you and all your troops and the peoples who are with you. I will give you as food to every kind of predatory bird and beast of the field. You will fall on the open field, for it is I who have spoken. So what we see there is two different places mentioned. It talks about the mountains of Israel, and mountains of Israel are mostly northern, northeastern part of Israel, and open fields, only in the southern part and some of the western, really edges of the Mediterranean Sea are what you would call open field areas. And so they're definitely separate areas, and so they're being described as separate areas in Israel, and so that makes some sense from what we saw on the map before, because there are two separate groups who would almost certainly be coming in from different directions, and so all of this is making sense with a map now and with where the countries are. Okay, so this attack group has to come in by some route, and or two routes, in fact, because they really are a separate part, the northern and the western. So how do they get in? We have Libya and Sudan over here. They want to get into Israel, which is over here. Real problem if Egypt says, no, you can't come through here. And Egypt is one of those countries that you would expect to be in this list of lists someplace, but they just aren't. And that's a curiosity. We'll talk about that some more. And so Libya and Sudan, if Egypt says, no, you can't come through our country, and they're a significant country, they are able to enforce that and say, no, you can't come through, and be respected for that. So the only other route they really have is a route that comes around the north here, perhaps by sea. That's a long sea excursion, or a shorter sea excursion here, hop across the Red Sea and go through Saudi Arabia, and then come up through here. So, and this is going to make some more sense as we talk about where Saudi Arabia fits into the puzzle here. They're not part of the attack group, but they do get mentioned later on. Okay, so that's the western, southwestern part of this attack group. So up here in the north, these could come in pretty easily. As I said before, these are all kind of joined together in a line up here. We know that Syria is not involved, but Lebanon is one of those countries that is mentioned in the comment group, and we'll talk about them in just a moment. So it would make some sense that all of these would come through into Turkey and then down, forcing Syria to accept them, and Syria might be lenient enough anyway to let them through. And so they would come into Israel from the north that way. So we would have a group that would most likely come in through the south this way, through Saudi Arabia, and another group that would come in from the north here through Lebanon. And as I said, this is all going to make more sense as we proceed along. Okay, so that's the attack group. Now we're going to talk about the comment group, and this is the odd group. They make this strange comment, and here's the quote from Ezekiel 38:13. It says, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish, with all its villages, will say to you, the attackers, have you come to capture spoil? Have you assembled your company to seize plunder, to carry away silver, or to take away cattle and goods, to capture great spoil? So I've highlighted in blue here something that you need to see, and they're asking this question in the tense of, are you here to grab stuff and take it away with you? So there's seize, carry away, take away, and capture. So these ideas are all things of you grab something and you run away with it. So a robbery. And asking that question is the curious part here. These questions like this in prophecy are always God's way of telling us something. It doesn't so much mean that the people in those countries will actually say that, although they will think that. But it does mean something to us, the readers of this, that we're supposed to pay attention to. And so they're telling us something about what's going on. And it could mean these countries are here to rob Israel. That would be the very most basic meaning you could take from that. They're to rob from Israel and then take it away. But how would that make sense in a global situation like our current world? Who would run into Israel and grab stuff and take it away? And besides that, Israel has a whole lot better stuff than just cattle and goods. Israel has a lot of valuable property and crops and a whole bunch of other things going on. And so it makes a whole lot more sense that this is in asking this question, they are implying that there is more going on than just robbing Israel. Likely that they're trying to take over Israel. And so this is really an effort to conquer Israel. Perhaps it's being advertised as just robbing Israel. Maybe they feel that they justly have some claim on some things in Israel, and they're going to steal back those things and be done with it. But their real intent is actually to take over Israel permanently. And that would definitely make some sense. So now these attackers are asked this question as though they are right there face to face with the countries who are asking those questions. Okay? And that is an important point to look at too. So they say, have you come to capture spoil? And so they're saying it to these attackers as though they are face to face with the attackers. So is that telling us that the attackers are passing through the lands of these commenters? Well, if you remember, these commenters, well, I guess I haven't explained who Sheba and Dedan are yet. Sheba and Dedan are Saudi Arabia, particularly northern Saudi Arabia, and Tarshish is what we used to call Phoenicia. It's now on the coast of the Mediterranean there. It's the land that they would be coming through Lebanon to get in. So what does make some sense that these two countries would be ones that the attackers would pass through on their way to get in if Egypt and other countries said no to allowing them to pass through their lands. And so I think that does tell us a whole bunch about this. It does tell us that Egypt is going to say no, and the other countries that are not listed in this attack group are going to be countries that say no, you can't pass through our lands. And so they come in by these other routes, and therefore it makes sense that the people who live in these countries that the routes are going to pass through are going to be asking them, what are you doing here? Why are you doing this? And we have already come up with the idea that almost certainly this is an effort to take over Israel completely. So looking a little bit at the comment group and where they are. Now, the Sheba and Dedan, that's Saudi Arabia here. And so that was where we said almost certainly Libya and Sudan would cross over a fairly short distance across the Red Sea and travel up. There are modern roads that go up here, and they can travel their forces on modern roads and get into Israel this way. And then from the north, we talked about them coming down through Lebanon here. And so both those routes that make sense because Assyria and Jordan and Egypt are all not on the list. And so we were kind of taking that as meaning they aren't participating. And not only that, they're not going to allow other people to participate if they can, if they have the force to enforce that. So so we see a whole lot of sense in what is being told to us from Ezekiel and putting that together into an attack plan and routing and all that sort of thing you would have to do, the logistics of any battle. Okay, so we've covered those, and now the conspicuously absent people I've referred to a number of times already. And for some reason, these countries are countries that you would expect to be in the attack force. They aren't in the commenters. They aren't listed there. They are Islamic, and that's one of the main characteristics that we see of all of the attackers, except Russia perhaps, but that depends a little bit on exactly where Rosh is. But these appear to be joined together by the common thread of Islamic or Muslims. And so they are Islamic countries, very high majority populations of Muslims. And so you would expect them to be in that group, except perhaps Jordan. Jordan has always been kind of neutral and somewhat friendly with Israel, although that comes and goes at times. And so you might not necessarily expect Jordan to be in the attack force, but they could be depending on just how the winds are blowing at the time the attack happens. And so the four that we see who are in this group are Egypt. Okay, now if Egypt was going to be in the attack force, they would be mentioned. And so the lack of mention means that they're not in the attack force. And because Egypt has long been an off and on frenemy of Israel, and that has gone both ways many times. And so Egypt and that name were well known, and they would have been referred to that way. Same thing with Syria. Syria has been known to Israel for the longest time. And if they were in this battle, they would have been referred to clearly as Syria, and we would have known who that's talking about. So that wouldn't it would be a surprise if they were involved and their name wasn't in here. And now Iraq is a little bit of an iffy one as well. Iraq is perhaps far enough away that they don't care that much, but nonetheless, they are an Islamic country. They are somebody you would expect to be in the attacker force. Why would they not be there? And so Iraq might be a little iffy, but you would really kind of expect them to be there. And one thing that's kind of interesting about all of these countries is it's a mix of all Islam. It is the Shia and the Sunni and all the others all together working together. And if you know your Muslim Islamic, Shia and Sunni don't get along very well together, and they haven't for a couple thousand years. So it's interesting that they're able to cooperate on this effort here. But nonetheless, these four countries are either unwilling or unable to participate, and it seems, especially in the case of Egypt, that they go for sure a step farther, and they say, no, you can't pass through our country. Your attacking force cannot go through here. So all of those are very interesting things, and brings up the question that we cannot answer is why? Why are they either unwilling or unable to participate? Have they been through wars and they're devastated, and therefore they just aren't able to, or are they just unwilling politically because they're somewhat friends of Israel at the time? And that is a good point to raise, because Israel has been making a lot of friends throughout Saudi Arabia and Egypt and stuff like that recently. And so it's quite likely that these could be friends of Israel at the time, and they aren't going to be involved in it because of that. Okay, so the conspicuously absent we talked about. Egypt we mentioned before, and it seems certain for other reasons that Egypt is not going to allow Libya and Sudan to pass through there and form up in northeastern Egypt to attack Israel. And Syria is another one. And as I said, these are all right bordering on Israel. So Syria is another one. Jordan is right next door to Israel. And so these three Islamic countries right next door to Israel, you would expect if there was going to be an attack on Israel, they would be involved. But because it's such an Islamic-based attack, but they're just not involved. And Iraq, as I said, is a little bit iffy. It's further away, and really they're not that closely involved in the affairs of Israel, although they have been in the past somewhat. So they're a little on the iffy side, but nonetheless, they meet the requirements. They're again an Islamic country close to Israel.